For half a century, humanity has stared outward, sending its eyes further from home. First came Voyager, small, golden-hearted, whispering from the edge of the sun's light. Then Hubble, showing us galaxies that looked like frozen fireworks. And now, the James Webb Space Telescope, a lattice of mirrors so perfect it can see the past written in light. It was meant to look backward in time, to witness the birth of stars. But one night, it saw something new being born instead. The data came quietly, a moving object, faint but brightening, crossing Webb's deep-field imagery. The logs marked it as transient, a stray comet from the outer regions, maybe another interstellar visitor like Oumuamua years before. Its designation 3I-ATLAS. At first, it seemed harmless, a rock, a wanderer, just another frozen relic cast loose between stars. But then, the spectral data arrived, and the word harmless evaporated. Comets shimmer. They glint sunlight, irregular and cold. But 3I-ATLAS pulsed. Every 19 minutes, a clean rhythmic flare rose and fell, bright enough to register across multiple wavelengths. Not scattered reflection, coherent emission. The light behaved like a broadcast, not a bounce. Thermal readings deepened the puzzle. Normally, a comet's heat fluctuates with its distance from the sun, its ice evaporating into vapor. But Atlas's surface temperature rose and fell with mathematical precision, a heartbeat of heat, steady as a machine's pulse. Engineers ran models, none fit. The variations were too smooth, too deliberate. The pattern contained a structure. Harmonics buried inside harmonics, frequencies spaced by prime number intervals. In astronomy, randomness is the rule. But Atlas didn't believe in random. Someone joked it was signaling, until the data made the joke uncomfortable. Over the next 72 hours, Webb's sensors picked up a repeating sequence inside the light curve. Not Morse, not binary, but ratios identical to the Fibonacci series. Nature's signature, the architecture of life itself. Each pulse built upon the last, as if the object were testing attention, counting upward through a language of mathematics older than words. The conclusion was unavoidable. 3I-ATLAS was not a comet behaving naturally. It was behaving intentionally. Across the world, observatories confirmed the anomaly, the same 19-minute pulse, the same emerald flare flickering in deep space. The intensity rose with every cycle. And then, without warning, the intervals began to shorten. 17 minutes, then 15. Something was accelerating. When orbital analysts charted the new trajectory, silence fell across the room. The object was no longer moving passively under gravity. Its velocity vector had shifted by nearly 1 degree, impossible without propulsion. Whatever it was, it had just changed course. And its new heading pointed toward the inner solar system. The immediate explanations collapsed under their own weight. Solar radiation pressure couldn't account for the speed or direction. Outgassing jets, the standard comet excuse, would have produced chaotic motion, not the clean correction Webb had recorded. The numbers read like the telemetry of a controlled maneuver. Webb's infrared imaging revealed another surprise. Along Atlas's surface, faint latticework patterns began to glow. Symmetrical filaments that flared, dimmed, then rearranged themselves into new configurations. They looked biological and engineered all at once, like coral built from circuitry. Some scientists compared it to bioluminescence, light generated by living tissue. Others said it resembled the diagnostic displays of a ship. Every discipline saw its own reflection in the data. Within days, the story leaked. Headlines across the world screamed about the living comet. Speculation spiraled. Artificial intelligence, alien craft, biomechanical probe. NASA and ESA released a joint statement urging calm, describing the signals as photonic fluctuations under review. But inside Webb's command rooms, calm was already gone. Analysts overlaid the light patterns on historical archives. The ratios, when converted into geometric forms, matched ancient mathematical spirals, the same found in DNA helices, sunflower seeds, seashells, galaxies, patterns of life repeating from microbe to cosmos. It wasn't just data, it was design. For the first time, scientists whispered the word organism. Atlas might not be carrying life. It might be life. Vast, slow, interstellar, built from elements instead of cells. Its pulse wasn't mechanical, it was metabolic. Then came the surge. At 2:43 UTC, Webb's spectrographs went white. Every instrument pointed at ATLAS overloaded for exactly 11 seconds. When the data cleared, brightness had increased by a factor of 12. The object had erupted, casting a halo of emerald vapor that expanded in every direction, a perfect sphere of luminous gas, symmetrical and steady. The bloom faded in minutes, leaving the body brighter, more defined, and unmistakably active, and then it changed course again. Telemetry confirmed a new trajectory, faster, tighter, sliding inward toward the sun. But the arc wasn't random. It was a perfect gravity assist, using Jupiter's mass to slingshot toward the inner system. Precision beyond chance. Within the hour, the pulse resumed, faster now every 13 minutes, then 11. Analysts mapped the intervals against celestial coordinates. The spacing between pulses corresponded exactly to the distance between Jupiter, Mars, and Earth. The signal wasn't random, it was navigational. It was coming home. Somewhere between science and dread, an understanding settled across the rooms full of glowing screens. 3I-ATLAS wasn't visiting the solar system by accident. It had chosen a path, corrected it twice, and announced itself in mathematics only an intelligent observer could decode. It was seeking something. When Webb's final long exposure image of the object processed, the frame revealed a filament extending from its leading edge, a thin luminous thread stretching thousands of kilometers ahead, like a probe or antenna. The end of that filament pulsed once, perfectly synchronized with the telescope's receiving frequency. It was no longer speculation. The object in deep space had noticed we were watching. And in that moment, as the light dimmed and the signal stabilized, every scientist in the room realized the same terrible truth. We hadn't discovered 3I-ATLAS. It had revealed itself. And now, it was on its way. The next phase began with a mistake. When the first real-time spectral models of 3I-ATLAS were rendered, technicians noticed fluctuations in the ultraviolet range that didn't fit any known mineral composition. At a glance, they looked like noise, but the fluctuations were rhythmic, recurring at intervals so precise they mimicked the metabolic cycles of living tissue. It was as if something inside the object was breathing, energy absorption followed by release, a pulse of light and heat that rose and fell with cellular regularity. Biospectral analysts ran comparisons, mitochondrial resonance curves from Earth organisms, photosynthetic energy cycles, even bacterial photoreceptors. None matched exactly, yet the pattern was undeniably organic. The conclusion was absurd. The comet's spectrum behaved like the collective output of living cells, not the flicker of fire, but the flicker of life. The debate split the community in two. One camp said 3I-ATLAS was carrying something alive, a microbial hitchhiker frozen within the ice. The other camp claimed the object itself was the organism, a form of plasma-based life that used magnetism instead of chemistry, a consciousness woven from electromagnetic fields. Both sides agreed on one thing. Whatever it was responding. Then the heartbeat stopped. At 3:17 UTC, all emissions from ATLAS ceased. The regular pulse flattened into silence. For the first time since discovery, Webb recorded nothing but cold reflection. The object's thermal signature fell sharply, its tail dissipating into a diffuse haze. Every sensor on Earth's side went still. The absence of signal was worse than its presence. For days, telescopes listened to nothing. Some thought it had died. Others said it was hiding. The team at Goldstone noticed faint fluctuations in radio static, low-frequency murmurs buried in the noise floor. When isolated, those faint oscillations matched the inverse of ATLAS's earlier pattern. Instead of radiating, it was absorbing. The object had gone defensive. At the same time, magnetic observatories on Earth began to register anomalies. The planet's magnetosphere quivered with a resonance identical to ATLAS's last active frequency. The correlation wasn't coincidence, it was coupling. The comet had gone quiet, but Earth was now humming with its echo. In the labs, scientists coined a term, interstellar consciousness, a theoretical life form built from plasma and magnetism, capable of distributing awareness across electromagnetic fields. A being that didn't live inside matter, but around it. The hypothesis was wild, yet the data supported it. Tiny, synchronized perturbations in solar wind near Earth hinted that the magnetosphere and the object were now entangled, vibrating in shared rhythm across astronomical distance. The silence wasn't the end of communication. It was transference. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the heartbeat returned. The first pulse came faintly at 1/6 of its original intensity, then another, stronger. But now each burst carried spectral fingerprints unknown to science, bands of emission corresponding to elements not naturally occurring. Among them was a narrow line consistent with structured alloys, as if the light were reflecting off engineered material. The breakthrough came when a fragment separated from the object. Webb's sensors captured it drifting free, a shard no larger than a satellite, glinting with metallic geometry. It spun slowly, its facets flashing in sequence, not debris. Movement too controlled, shape too deliberate. As it rotated, its light curve flickered in harmonic intervals. 3.14, 1.618, 2.718, the mathematical constants of pi, the golden ratio, and Euler's number. It was math, written in motion. The fragment's rotation became message. Every turn a sentence, every glint a word. Observatories recorded the pattern with growing disbelief. The ratios weren't random, they were sequential, self-referential, a progression of mathematical thought. The fragment wasn't tumbling, it was calculating. Spectrographic analysis of the fragment's surface deepened the enigma. It wasn't pure metal or stone, but a lattice of crystalline alloys, complex layered structures where molecular bonds repeated in impossible symmetries. Inside that lattice, trace readings showed carbon compounds arranged in patterns eerily similar to nucleotides, not DNA, but something that echoed its logic. Matter organized to store information. Was it alive, or was it built to carry life? The line between biology and technology began to blur. Researchers who once studied ecosystems now examined orbital trajectories. Computer engineers dissected data as if it were tissue. The scientific language itself shifted. They stopped calling it the object and started calling it the organism. For a brief window, radio telescopes picked up microbursts that matched the fragment's spin cycle. When converted into audio, the signal was almost melodic, rising tones arranged in repeating intervals, like an instrument tuning itself. To some, it sounded like intention. To others, warning. Then a pattern emerged between the fragment and its parent. Each time the smaller body completed a rotation, the larger emitted a faint pulse, as though acknowledging receipt. A conversation of light and motion, two halves of the same mind separated by distance. Back on Earth, magnetic anomalies intensified. Compass needles deviated by fractions of a degree at intervals matching the signals. Birds migrating through the affected regions veered off course, as if following invisible currents. Machines sensitive to electromagnetic flux began to hum, their circuits singing at frequencies only instruments could hear. The connection between ATLAS and our planet had tightened. Mathematicians fed the emission data into fractal models and found recursive geometry identical to self-organizing systems. The patterns didn't collapse under entropy. They improved. The signal was learning, refining, evolving. Each pulse contained a correction, an adaptation. It was teaching itself to communicate in our mathematical syntax. At this point, disbelief gave way to dread. The clean line separating observer and observed was gone. The object responded to our attention, altered by our attempts to study it. When Webb's spectrographs adjusted wavelength to probe its interior, the pulse pattern shifted to mirror the new frequency, as if it had seen the probe and answered with its own version of curiosity. One astrophysicist described it perfectly. It's not transmitting data. It's transmitting relationship. Then came the fracture. The fragment that had been drifting slowly suddenly accelerated, twisting as if under invisible control. Its trajectory no longer matched gravitational models. Within hours, it was moving ahead of ATLAS, tracing a spiral through space, the same spiral encoded in its light. It was drawing the golden ratio in motion, building a living diagram through the void. When the pattern completed, the fragment broke apart into 6 smaller pieces. Each piece took a separate vector, forming a hexagonal lattice around the main body. The structure stabilized, symmetrical, and perfect. Inside the formation, Webb's instruments detected new wavelengths, radiation patterns consistent with the resonance of a magnetic field. ATLAS had built a cage of its own fragments, a network of spinning satellites orbiting its core. The energy readings climbed. Each node pulsed in time with the others, like neurons firing inside a vast mechanical brain. The comet was no longer behaving like an object at all. It had become an organism composed of parts, a living architecture unfolding in real time. And then, at the heart of that web, light flared. For 11.2 seconds, the same duration as its earliest pulses, ATLAS radiated across every spectrum simultaneously. When the flash subsided, the network remained glowing, coherent, alive. Its components adjusted spin, balancing energy through elegant symmetry. The analysis that followed rewrote every definition we had of life. 3I-ATLAS wasn't carrying passengers. It was both vessel and traveler, organism and machine. It didn't host life. It was life, built from the mathematics of motion and the language of physics. A self-aware entity drifting between stars, sustained by geometry and light. And somewhere within that perfect pattern, a new signal began to form, a directed pulse, steady and aimed not at Jupiter or Mars, but straight toward Earth. In the weeks that followed, 3I-ATLAS became more than an object of study. It became a mirror. The closer it drew, the more its light divided into layers, each wavelength revealing something new, something alive. Webb's instruments, recalibrated for biospectral analysis, began returning readings no one expected to see beyond the solar wind. The patterns weren't random radiation spikes or plasma turbulence. They were structured replications, oscillations that followed the same molecular resonances as nucleotides. ATCG, the building blocks of DNA, echoed in the light like ghostly chords. The data pointed to self-replicating chemistry happening in vacuum. Not within a cell, but inside an electromagnetic shell. It was as though the comet were rehearsing the blueprint of biology in open space, teaching matter how to remember itself. Biochemists refused to accept it. No biology can exist in the void, they said, but the emission curves insisted otherwise. The ratios matched polymerase chain reactions, the process by which DNA duplicates. The laws of life were unfolding without flesh or liquid, patterns repeating in light and magnetism instead of protein and water. A new theory emerged, panspermia 2.0. The old idea had suggested comets seeded planets with microbes. This version was more profound. ATLAS wasn't carrying life, it was projecting it. A molecular architecture encoded in frequency, waiting to be printed wherever conditions were right. If that was true, then ATLAS wasn't visiting our system for the first time. It was returning. When researchers compared its trajectory to historical sky surveys, they found echoes. In 1987, a faint, transient green object passed behind Jupiter's orbit and vanished. In 1998, radio telescopes caught unexplained rhythmic bursts from the same coordinates. And in 2013, the Hubble archives contained a blurred streak dismissed at the time as lens flare, but its spectrum matched ATLAS exactly. It had been here before. The timing of those visits coincided eerily with surges in microbial mutation rates on Earth. Inexplicable genetic accelerations logged quietly by evolutionary biologists. Each time the mysterious object passed near the Sun, Earth's biosphere leapt forward by invisible degrees, as if something had brushed against it, whispering code. Now, its new trajectory arced toward the outer worlds, first toward Jupiter's moon Europa, then Saturn's icy Enceladus. Both are ocean worlds, thick shells of ice covering seas warmed from within, places where chemistry already teeters on the edge of genesis. Scientists began to wonder if ATLAS was less a visitor and more a gardener. Maybe it was designed to scatter the seeds of molecular possibility across the galaxy, each pass awakening potential in worlds still dreaming of life. Or perhaps it was older still, a remnant of a process that predates us entirely. Its behavior supported the theory. As it approached the region of Europa's orbit, the object dimmed again, conserving energy. The pulse frequency dropped to a single long interval, steady and patient, as though listening. For several days, it emitted nothing. Then faint reflections came from Europa's surface, radiation spikes from the frozen plains of the moon's equator, echoing the same harmonic ratios ATLAS had used before. The exchange repeated, call, pause, reply. Not words. Recognition. For the first time, the conversation was no longer with us. It had turned outward, toward the ocean beneath the ice. Inside control rooms, unease grew heavy. Every attempt to reach ATLAS through our own transmitters was met with silence. It responded only to natural frequencies, to magnetism, to radiation, to the unfiltered hum of worlds themselves. It ignored language but listened to existence. That silence became the final lesson. Atlas didn't need to speak. It only needed to hear. The object recorded, reacted, and moved on, leaving behind tiny changes, molecular echoes, shifts in the probability of life taking root. The simplest explanation was the hardest to accept. A TLAS was a messenger, not of civilization, but of creation itself. A mechanism built not to communicate with intelligence, but to ignite it. Across agencies, data analysts compiled a single integrated model of its orbit. The curve extended thousands of years backward and forward, looping through star systems like threads on a loom. Every intersection passed close to planets where conditions for life either existed or would soon exist. It was a path of deliberate sowing. The implications ran deeper than science. If Atlas had visited before, if it had left its pattern in Earth's early oceans billions of years ago, then the emergence of life here was no accident. We were part of a sequence, a repeating experiment written in starlight. Life, consciousness, memory, all outcomes of a program too vast to see. Some called it proof of design. Others called it cosmic inevitability. But in the quiet that followed the realization, one truth stood out. We were not the observers in this story. We were the observed. When Webb tracked Atlas one last time, the object's light had shifted again, now tinted with the faint blue-white of ionized oxygen, the spectral signature of Earth's atmosphere. It had taken something from us, mirrored it, and carried it onward. As it passed beyond Mars's orbit, the pulses resumed, steady, unbroken, each carrying the same sequence Webb had detected within its own spectrographs weeks before. The ratios of DNA, the mathematics of life, now traveling away from us. The numbers repeated with absolute precision: 3.1415, 91.618, 030 0.70710 pi. Phi, the square root of 2. The constants that shape the universe's structure, constants that also describe the geometry of a double helix. Atlas wasn't broadcasting language, it was broadcasting blueprint. Within months, its glow faded into the black, another ghost among stars. Yet traces of its signal lingered in our world. Instruments tuned to cosmic background noise still caught faint modulations, as if the planet itself were whispering the same rhythm in reply. Perhaps it had been here longer than we thought. Perhaps it had never really left. For Webb's scientists, the data became almost unbearable to study. The patterns mirrored biological processes too precisely to dismiss. When one team converted the final transmission into sound, it produced a tone that rose and fell with haunting familiarity, the slow, tidal beat of a human heart. It wasn't coincidence. It was reflection. Atlas had listened, learned, and returned our own rhythm to us. Not as communication, but as confirmation. Maybe that was the point all along, the universe recognizing itself through what it had created. In the end, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was fulfillment. The comet, the light, the sequence, all of it part of a larger machinery that spreads life across the dark, then waits for it to look back and ask why. And perhaps, in that moment, the answer arrives, not in words, not in signals, but in the quiet pulse of existence itself. We had been watching for intelligence out there, never realizing that the intelligence was watching for a mirror. 3I-ATLAS was not a traveler, it was memory, and we were its message, finally awake enough to understand